Good afternoon. We're going to be walking through the process of setting up your first domain controller in your first forest. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to want to go ahead and I'm logged on to what's going to be my domain controller. I called him DCO1. So basically what we're going to do, we're going to start off by go to Server Manager, Local Server, click on Manage. We're going to add roles and features. So we're going to get to this wizard. You can skip the page by default if you want. We're going to click next. It's going to be a role based or feature based because we're not setting up a virtual desktop infrastructure or a remote desktop server. So we're going to go ahead and click next. So there's only one server here, DCO1. So we're going to go ahead and click next here. So this is where we're going to select what server role we want to use. So since this is going to be setting up an Active Directory Active Directory domain services, we're going to select AD domain services. It's going to ask you, do you want to add all the features that are required? You can go ahead and select add features and include management tools. So then we're going to set next. So pretty much here all we have to do is leave it as default. And we're going to actually install on-prem. We're not going to connect to Azure Active Directory at this point in time. So just go ahead and click next. And then you can have the option, I'm going to go ahead and check restart the destination server automatically. Is required, click yes. So basically what this is going to do, this is going to install the role itself. Once this role is installed, we'll have to go through and configure the actual first domain controller in the forest and then the domain. So I'm going to go ahead and click install. Alright, so the initial configuration installation is complete, so I'm going to hit close and I'm going to go ahead and restart. You could pretty much go in and promote this server to a domain controller, but typically after main installations of roles and features, I like to go ahead and install or restart. So I'm going to go ahead and restart this server just to give it a clean install. Alright, so now that the server is back up, we're going to go ahead and configure this Windows member server and promote it to a domain controller. So we're going to go back up here within Server Manager in the dashboard. As you can see, there's a little warning indicator that says there's configuration required. So we're going to go ahead and click the promote this server to domain controller link. So the deployment configuration, as it's pulling up some background information and getting the wizard ready, as you can see, the first option is, do we want to add a domain controller to an existing domain, add a new domain to an existing forest, or add a new forest. So since this is the very first domain controller, we're actually going to be adding a new forest. So once we add a new forest, we have to specify what the root domain is going to be. So the root domain for this is going to be, we're going to call it contoso.com, of course, because that's one of Microsoft's most used fictitious domains. And then we'll hit next. Alright, so this is the domain controller options. So as you can see, there's various forest functional levels and there's various domain functional levels. Depending on what functional level you are at, depends on what additional features or enhanced features you can utilize within the Active Directory forest as well as the domain. Typically, like 2003, 2008, they support some legacy systems and there's authentication types and various other features that they support, whereas some of the newer functional levels do not. And then newer functional levels have more enhanced features versus if you're running in 2003 or 2008, 2012. So since this is a 2019 server, we're going to go in Forest Functional Level 6 2016, and we're going to do domain level 2016. We're going to, since this is a DC, Active Directory, DNS typically integrate, they go hand in hand. So we're going to make this a DNS server, and then since this is the first server in the new forest, global catalog is checked automatically. You cannot uncheck that because you have to have at least one global catalog. Because basically a global catalog stores information and it gets replicated across the forest, whereas just standard DCs only replicate information within its domain. And then we're going to create a directory services restore mode password, and it's very important that whatever you make this password, you want to keep it, because if you want to actually restore a DC, you need this password to go through that process. But for testing demo environments, yeah, it's not that important. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next. And I'm going to go ahead and the NetBIOS domain is going to be Contoso. So go ahead and click next. So specify the location of the ADDS database log files in sysvol. So pretty much with domain controllers, you could change this if your Active Directory environment, if you're in a super large environment and it gets pretty big, typically you can leave it in this location, and that's what I'm going to do for this environment. So we'll go ahead and hit next. And then this is basically the review. So, you know, anytime you do anything that's important or that could cause some issue, if there's any review selections, I would highly recommend that you go ahead and review that, because if you don't, you might miss something and you can cause all kinds of issues. So go ahead and hit next. So at this point it's just running through doing its prereqs and making sure that this server has everything installed and that's needed in order to promote this to a DNS server as well as a domain controller and be able to create the forest. So go ahead and click install. So at this point it's going to go through and it's going to promote this to a domain controller. Once it does, it's going to install all the set of tools that you typically use to manage an Active Directory environment. Active Directory users and computers, Active Directory sites and services, the schema snap-in will be installed, the administrative center, which I don't like, I don't use, it's clunky. So I mean those are in your DNS snap-in, that's where you'll manage a lot of your DNS records, stuff like that. So and that's how you install a new DC in a new domain and new forest.